The sharp, definitive scratch of a fountain pen across heavy paper was the only sound in the sprawling downtown penthouse. Carter didn't even glance at the bold, capitalized letters at the top of the document. His entire focus was tethered to the sleek smartphone pressed hard against his ear, his handsome face pulled into a tight mask of anxiety. "I know, Olivia, I know. Just breathe. Deep breaths for me, okay? I'm on my way right now," Carter murmured into the receiver, his voice dripping with a tender, urgent patience that Ava hadn't heard directed at her in over a year. Without missing a beat, he scrawled his signature on the bottom line of the paper Ava had slid across the marble kitchen island. He tossed the pen aside, leaving a small splatter of black ink on the pristine white stone. "Whatever this is, Ava, we will deal with it later," Carter said, his tone instantly shifting from a warm embrace to a cold, dismissive annoyance as he grabbed his tailored coat. "Olivia's having a severe panic attack at her apartment. She's completely alone and terrified. Don't wait up." He didn't wait for her response. He didn't look at her face. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, vibrating the crystal glasses on the dining table. Ava stood perfectly still in the deafening silence of the kitchen, her eyes fixed on his hurried, sloppy signature on the last page of their divorce and asset settlement agreement. 8 years of history, 5 years of marriage, and he had literally signed it away blind just to rush to the side of his college sweetheart. She didn't cry. There were no tears left. The well had run completely, bone dry 3 months ago. Looking at the ink drying on the paper, the scratching sound of Carter's pen echoed in Ava's mind, morphing seamlessly into the horrifying splitting screech of twisting metal and shattering glass on a rain. Slicked Avenue, 3 months ago, the world had ended. Ava had been sitting in the back of a cab, her fingers trembling with pure, unadulterated joy as she traced the grainy black and white image of a sonogram, 12 weeks, a healthy heartbeat. She was on her way to Carter's office to surprise him, completely unaware that a drunk driver in a heavy pickup truck was about to run a red light at 80 miles an hour. The impact was a violent explosion that tore her reality to shreds. When Ava regained consciousness, she was lying on the cold, wet asphalt, the rain mixing with the warm, dark pool of blood spreading rapidly beneath her. The agony in her abdomen was absolute, a visceral ripping sensation that told her with cruel certainty that her baby was gone. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't scream, but through the chaotic blur of flashing hazard lights and panicked bystanders, her desperate, fading vision caught sight of a familiar vehicle. It was Carter's custom black SUV, stalled in the traffic backup just a few yards across the intersection. Hope, fierce and blinding, had flared in her chest. She had tried to raise her bloodied hand, trying to push his name past her mangled lips. He was right there. Her husband was right there. She watched the driver's side window roll down. She saw Carter's profile sharp and recognizable, even in the pouring rain. But he wasn't looking at the wreckage. He was looking at his phone. Through the pouring rain, the sound of his voice carried over the Bluetooth speaker of his car, loud and clear. "Olivia, I am at the intersection. I see the traffic. Hang tight. I'm taking a detour. I'll be at the airport to pick you up in 20. He rolled the window up, aggressively whipped the steering wheel to the right, and sped off down a side street, his taillights blurring into red streaks. He didn't even cast a second glance at the woman bleeding out on the pavement. He had a flight to meet. His fragile first love had just returned from overseas, and that was all that mattered. Ava had closed her eyes right then, the cold rain washing over her face as the last shred of her soul shattered into dust. Now, standing in the luxurious, empty penthouse, Ava pulled herself out of the memory. The phantom pain in her stomach gave way to a chilling, absolute clarity. For years, she had compromised her own brilliant legal career to be the perfect, supportive corporate wife. She had made Carter her entire universe, only to realize he treated her like a convenient, easily dismissed orbit. She picked up the signed divorce decree, her hands steady, her posture impeccably straight. Taking her phone from her pocket, she dialed a number she had saved weeks ago, but hadn't used until this exact moment. It rang only twice before a deep, steady, and unapologetically commanding voice answered. Ava Harrison said, just her name, but it carried a weight of quiet respect that anchored her. He was the senior partner at a rival firm, a man who had watched her operate in the courtroom with open admiration, a man who saw a titan where Carter only saw a shadow. Harrison, Ava replied, her voice smooth and unwavering. The offer to co-lead the international division in Europe, is it still on the table? For you, the table is cleared and the seat is waiting. Harrison answered without a moment's hesitation, a hint of a smile warming his usually stoic tone. When can you start? My flight leaves tonight. I'll see you on Monday. She hung up the phone, walking into the master bedroom. She pulled out a single, sleek suitcase. She didn't pack the designer dresses Carter had bought her for his corporate galas, nor the expensive jewelry he used as apology gifts. She packed only what was hers, her tailored suits, her legal notes, her identity. Within an hour, Ava stood at the front door, pulling her coat around her shoulders. She cast one last look at the penthouse that had been her gilded cage on the kitchen island. Front and center sat the divorce agreement, right next to the keys she would never use again. She walked out and let the door click shut, severing the past with the turn of a lock, leaving Carter utterly oblivious to the fact that when he returned from comforting his precious Olivia, his entire world would be burned to the ground. The fire in the grandstone hearth of the penthouse living room crackled and hissed, casting long, dancing shadows across the hardwood floors. It was meant to be cozy, a comfort against the biting chill of the winter night outside. But to Ava, the flames were just a tool for cremation. She stood before the fire, her expression as unreadable as carved marble. In her hands, she held a small, intricately carved wooden music box. It was rough around the edges, clearly the work of an amateur. Carter had spent weeks whittling it for her during their senior year of college when he was a broke business major and couldn't afford to buy her a birthday gift. He had presented it to her with scraped knuckles and a sheepish smile, promising her that one day he would give her the world. For years, Ava had cherished it above all else, treating it as the purest, most tangible proof of their love. Now, she just saw a piece of dead wood. The memory of the night she realized this box meant nothing surfaced, unbidden but razor sharp. It was barely a week after she had been discharged from the hospital following the miscarriage. She was pale, physically hollowed out, and mentally fragile. Carter had insisted on hosting a small, intimate dinner party for a few old college friends to celebrate his latest promotion. Naturally, Olivia had been on the guest list. Midway through the evening, Olivia had placed a delicate hand against her chest, her doe, eyes widening in exaggerated distress. Carter, the heating in here is so aggressive. I feel like I can't breathe. My chest is getting tight. Without a second thought, Carter had turned to Ava. Ava, go open the terrace doors and stay out there for a bit to clear the air. You are hovering anyway, he hadn't asked. He had commanded. He hadn't noticed how Ava, still recovering from profound blood loss, was already shivering in her light dress. When Ava hesitated, Carter had physically ushered her out onto the terrace and slid the heavy glass doors shut behind her. Let's analyze the anatomy of the convenient wife. Carter didn't ask Ava to step outside. He physically moved her to regulate the temperature of his mistress's manufactured anxiety. He literally put his wife out in the cold so another woman could breathe. Women are conditioned to be the emotional thermostats in a relationship, absorbing the freeze so the man can stay warm. Ava stayed on that balcony for 2 hours because she still believed physical endurance was a love language. It's not. It's just hypothermia. The moment you are asked to shrink, freeze, or suffer to accommodate a man's ego-stroking side project, the marriage is already a corpse. You just haven't buried it yet. She had stood out there for 2 agonizing hours in a December blizzard. The freezing wind cut through her clothes like ice picks, chilling her to the marrow through the glass. She could see the warm, golden glow of the living room. She watched Carter laughing, pouring wine, and leaning in close to listen to Olivia speak. His body language entirely devoted to another woman while his wife froze in the dark. By the time the guests left and Carter finally remembered to unlock the door, Ava had collapsed. The resulting fever had raged at 104 degrees for 3 days, plunging her into a delirium where she realized she was entirely, utterly alone in this marriage. Standing now before the fireplace, Ava's grip on the music box tightened for just a fraction of a second. Then, with a fluid, dismissive motion, she tossed the wooden box directly into the roaring flames. She didn't flinch as the varnish blistered and the wood began to blacken and curl. She watched the fire consume the last sentimental anchor she had to Carter, watching it turn into fragile gray ash that broke apart in the updraft. The past was dead, and she was the one holding the shovel. She turned her back on the fire, grabbed her suitcase handle, and walked out without looking back. 2 days later, the electronic lock on the penthouse door beeped, and Carter strode in, bringing a gust of cold city air with him. He tossed his keys onto the console table, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He had spent the last 48 hours dealing with Olivia's endless cycle of manufactured crises, tears, hyperventilation, and vague threats of returning to Europe if he didn't stay with her. He was drained, and all he wanted was a hot meal, and for Ava to quietly massage his temples, the way she always did. "Ava," he called out, shrugging off his coat, "I am home. Sorry I was gone so long. Olivia's transition back has been rougher than we thought." Silence answered him. A thick, hollow silence that immediately set his teeth on edge. "Ava, don't start with the silent treatment," he sighed, walking into the grand living room. He expected to find her curled up on the sofa, nursing a grievance he would eventually have to coax her out of. But the sofa was empty. The throw pillows were perfectly arranged, untouched. The house felt unnaturally still, devoid of the soft scent of her perfume or the faint sound of the classical music she usually played while working. Frowning, Carter moved toward the kitchen. The first thing that caught his eye was the pristine emptiness of the counters. Save for one spot, dead center on the marble island lay a thick manila envelope. Next to it sat her set of penthouse keys and the diamond wedding band he had bought her when he made his first million. Carter's heart gave a strange, uneven thump. He walked over, picking up the ring. It was cold. He grabbed the envelope, a sudden, inexplicable dread pooling in his stomach. He ripped it open. The document he had scribbled his name on 2 nights ago slid out. Divorce decree and final asset settlement. His eyes locked onto the bottom line. There it was. His own signature, sloppy but legally binding, resting right beside hers. Below it was the fresh, undeniable stamp of a notary and a judge's finalized seal. "What is this?" Carter whispered to the empty room, a hollow laugh escaping his throat. "Is this a joke, Ava?" He pulled out his phone, his thumb jamming hard against her contact name. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. And again, the number you have reached is no longer in service. Panic, cold and sharp, finally began to pierce through his arrogance. He bolted toward the master bedroom. He threw open her closet doors. Her side, every suit, every pair of practical shoes, her passport, her legal briefcase, gone. Only the expensive, frivolous things he had bought for her remained, hanging like ghosts. He rushed back into the living room, his breathing growing ragged. As he paced, his gaze fell upon the fireplace. The fire had long burned out, but amidst the charred logs, a small, twisted piece of metal caught his eye. The tiny, warped crank mechanism of a music box, resting in a pile of gray ash. The box he had carved for her. The box she had once told him she would save from a burning building. Carter stumbled back, the divorce decree slipping from his numb fingers to flutter onto the floor. The terrifying, suffocating reality slammed into him like a physical blow. She wasn't throwing a tantrum. She wasn't waiting to be coaxed. Ava was gone, and he had signed the papers to let her go without even looking at them. The private club in the heart of London was a symphony of low lighting, expensive crystal, and the quiet, confident hum of the European legal elite. Ava stood near the floor, to ceiling windows overlooking the Thames, holding a flute of champagne. She wore a tailored emerald green suit that fit her like armor, her posture exuding a calm, lethal grace that drew eyes from across the room. For the first time in years, she felt like she was breathing clean air. The heavy, suffocating weight of being Carter's wife had been shed entirely. "You are intimidating the junior partners again," a smooth, deep voice murmured beside her. Ava turned to find Harrison stepping up next to her, handing her a fresh glass. He was impeccably dressed. As always, his silver fox charm and sharp, intelligent eyes commanding immediate respect. There was a quiet power about him, a grounded stability that was the polar opposite of Carter's chaotic, ego-driven energy. "I am just standing here, Harrison," Ava replied, a genuine, relaxed smile touching her lips. "That is exactly it," Harrison chuckled, his gaze lingering on her face with a warmth that was entirely devoid of pressure. "You stand like you own the room? It's brilliant. The board is thrilled with the European merger strategy you outlined today. I knew bringing you on was the best decision I've made in a decade." "Thank you for the opportunity," Ava said, clinking her glass against his. "And for the lack of drama." "Drama is for amateurs," Harrison replied easily, though his eyes sharpened slightly as he looked toward the entrance of the club. "Though it seems some amateurs have a hard time staying away." Half a world away, the penthouse in New York was a disaster zone. Carter sat on the edge of the master bed, surrounded by discarded shirts and empty Scotch glasses. His usually perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess, his eyes bloodshot and sunken. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. He hadn't slept in 3 days. He had hired 3 different private investigators to track Ava down, but she had ghosted him completely, erasing her digital footprint with the ruthless efficiency of a top-tier lawyer. The silence in the apartment was driving him insane. Every corner reminded him of her. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that he didn't even know how the coffee machine worked or where the extra blankets were kept. Ava had managed his life so seamlessly that he had mistaken her devotion for permanence. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He snatched it up, desperate for a lead from his investigators. Instead, it was an email notification. A forwarded document from his personal assistant, marked urgent medical records requested. Carter's brow furrowed. He had demanded his assistant pull every possible record connected to Ava's name over the past year, looking for a clue, a destination, a new doctor. He opened the PDF. It was a hospital discharge summary from 3 months ago. Patient, Ava Vance, date of admission, the 14th of October, diagnosis severe abdominal trauma, secondary to motor vehicle collision. Emergency dilation and curettage performed. Notes complete fetal loss. Patient presented with profound hemorrhaging. Carter stopped breathing. The 14th of October. The date burned itself into his retinas. The 14th of October was the day Olivia had flown back. The day he had been stuck in traffic at that horrific intersection crash. The day he had impatiently veered his car down a side street to avoid the ambulance, annoyed that the delay might make him late to pick up his precious first love. The woman bleeding on the pavement, the flashing hazard lights. It was Ava. She had been lying there in the rain, losing their baby, and he had literally driven away from her to go comfort another woman. Here is the fatal flaw of a man addicted to playing the hero. He is so desperate for the applause of a damsel in distress that he will drive right past a genuine tragedy. Carter didn't realize he was abandoning his bleeding wife because his eyes were glued to his savior complex. Men like Carter don't actually love the women they save. They love the reflection of their own power in those women's needy eyes. But let's be explicitly clear. Karma in these stories is rarely mystical. It is usually just a narcissist finally reading his own receipts. He signed the divorce papers blind, and he drove past his own ruined future because he couldn't look away from a cheap ego boost. It is a brilliant, brutal, divine comedy. A guttural, animalistic sound tore from Carter's throat. He dropped the phone as if it burned him, his hands flying to his hair, pulling at the roots. "Number, no, no, no," he gasped, his chest heaving as the crushing weight of the truth collapsed his lungs. He had killed their child. He had abandoned his wife to die on the street. And then he had locked her on a freezing balcony. And then he had blindly signed away their marriage because he was too busy to look at her. "Whatever this is, Ava, we will deal with it later." His own arrogant words echoed in his head, mocking him. The sound of the front door opening abruptly snapped him out of his spiral. "Carter." A high, breathy voice called out, "Carter, honey." The door was unlocked. Olivia walked into the bedroom, wearing a silk trench coat loosely tied over a sheer, unnecessarily revealing slip dress. She held a bottle of expensive wine, a sultry, manufactured pout on her lips. She had sensed Carter pulling away over the last few days and decided it was time to lock him down. With Ava finally out of the picture, she assumed the penthouse, and Carter's bank accounts were hers for the taking. "You look so stressed, baby," Olivia cooed, sauntering toward him, letting the coat slip off one shoulder. "Let me help you relax. We don't have to worry about Ava ruining the mood anymore." She reached out to touch his face. The moment her skin made contact with his, a violent surge of absolute physical revulsion ripped through Carter. He didn't just push her away, he shoved her backward with such force that she stumbled and fell hard onto the plush carpet, the wine bottle shattering against the baseboard. "Get your hands off me," Carter roared, his voice cracking with a terrifying rage. He stood up, towering over her, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "Don't you ever say her name." "You make me sick," Olivia gasped, scrambling backward, her carefully crafted, helpless persona breaking into genuine shock. "Carter, what is wrong with you? You love me. You left her for me. I pity you," Carter screamed, the illusion completely shattered. He finally saw her not as the delicate flower he needed to protect, but as the manipulative parasite she was. He saw every lie, every fake panic attack, every calculated move to push Ava out. "Get out of my house. Get out before I throw you off that balcony." "You can't do this to me," Olivia shrieked. her face twisting into something ugly and desperate. "I have nowhere to go. You promised me." "You are a fraud, Olivia," Carter sneered, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And I know exactly why you fled to Europe 5 years ago. I know about the patient whose chart you altered to cover your own incompetence. I ignored it because I thought you were just careless. But you're poison." Olivia's face drained of all color, her eyes widening in sheer terror. "I've already sent the anonymous tip to the medical board and the district attorney." Carter lied smoothly, fueled by pure malice. "They'll be looking into your sabbatical. Now get the hell out of my sight." He grabbed her by the arm, hauled her to her feet, and literally dragged her out of the bedroom, throwing her out the front door into the hallway before slamming it shut. Leaning his back against the heavy door, Carter slid down to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest in the empty, silent penthouse. He was a wealthy, powerful man, and he had absolutely nothing. His phone chimed from the bedroom. He scrambled up and ran to it. It was his lead investigator, subject located. "Ava Vance is in London, attending the Global Legal Summit tomorrow night." Carter didn't pack a bag. He didn't change his rumpled shirt. He grabbed his passport and ran out the door. He was going to Europe. He was going to get on his knees, and he wasn't going to get up until she looked at him again. The grand ballroom of the historic London hotel was a sea of bespoke tuxedos, glittering evening gowns, and the quiet clinking of crystal flutes. The Global Legal Summit's closing gala was the pinnacle of the European corporate calendar, and Ava was its undisputed star. She moved through the crowd with an effortless, predatory grace, her emerald gown catching the light as she conversed in fluent French with a Parisian tech mogul. Harrison stood half a step behind her, an imposing, steady presence. He didn't interrupt or overshadow her. He simply held the space, a silent testament to the fact that she was a force of nature entirely in her element. "You have them eating out of the palm of your hand," Harrison murmured, leaning in close enough for her to catch the faint, clean scent of his cologne. Ava turned to him, her eyes sparkling with genuine amusement. "I just reminded them of the tax implications. Fear is a great appetizer." Harrison chuckled, his gaze dropping to her smile. "You look beautiful tonight, Ava, truly." The compliment was simple, devoid of the transactional flattery Carter used to deploy when he needed her to play the perfect accessory. It felt honest, and for a fleeting second, a warm flush crept up Ava's neck. Before she could reply, a sudden, jarring commotion rippled through the elegant crowd near the ballroom entrance. Voices murmured in irritation, and a waiter nearly dropped a tray of hors d'oeuvres as a man shoved roughly past him. Ava turned, her polite smile freezing on her face. It was Carter. He looked nothing like the polished, arrogant CEO she had left in New York. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and a dark shadow of stubble covered his jaw. His eyes were bloodshot, frantically scanning the room until they locked onto her. The moment he saw her, a raw, naked desperation twisted his features. "Ava!" he shouted, his voice cracking, entirely inappropriate for the hushed elegance of the venue. He barreled toward her, shoving past a pair of startled diplomats. Ava felt a surge of cold annoyance, but zero panic. She didn't shrink back. She stood taller, her expression shuddering into a mask of pure ice. "Ava, thank God," Carter gasped, skidding to a halt in front of her. He reached out, his hands trembling violently, and grabbed her wrist. "I found you. I flew straight here, please. You have to come back. I know everything. I know about the baby. I know about the crash. Ava, I am so sorry. I am so damn sorry." His words spilled out in a chaotic, pathetic rush. He was crying, actual tears tracking down his haggard face. The great Carter Vance, who had always viewed vulnerability as a weakness, was publicly breaking down in front of Europe's legal elite. Ava looked down at his hand gripping her wrist, her eyes flat and dead. "Let go of me, Carter." "No, no, please. Just listen to me," Carter pleaded, his grip tightening, a manic edge to his voice. "I was blind. I was a fool. I threw Olivia out. I swear to God. I'll never look at another woman again. I'll give you everything. I'll make it right. Just come home. Please, my God, please come home." "You don't have a home to offer me," Ava stated, her voice carrying clearly over his pathetic sobs. "You have a penthouse where you locked me out in a blizzard after I lost our child. You have a driveway where you drove past me bleeding on the asphalt. You don't have a home, Carter. You have a crime scene." Carter flinched as if she had slapped him. The raw, unfiltered truth of his actions, spoken out loud, seemed to physically hollow him out. "I didn't know," he wailed, his knees actually buckling slightly. "I swear, I didn't know it was you in the crash." "It shouldn't have mattered if it was me," Ava replied, her voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. "It was a human being bleeding in the street, and you drove away because you were late to comfort your ex-girlfriend. Your ignorance doesn't excuse your cruelty. It just highlights it." She yanked her arm, trying to pull away, but Carter, fueled by sheer frantic desperation, held on. "Ava, no, please." Before Carter could finish the sentence, a large, impeccably tailored hand clamped down on his shoulder. Harrison hadn't raised his voice, nor had he rushed. He had simply stepped between them, his posture radiating a quiet, dangerous authority. "The lady told you to let go," Harrison said, his tone deceptively mild. Carter whipped his head around, his red-rimmed eyes locking onto Harrison. He recognized the man immediately. The rival partner, the man who had always looked at Ava with the respect Carter had failed to give her. A surge of irrational, territorial jealousy flared through his panic. "Back off, Harrison," Carter snarled, trying to shove the larger man away. "This is between me and my wife, ex-wife," Harrison corrected smoothly. "And you are currently trespassing on a private event and assaulting my colleague." "I said back off," Carter roared, completely losing what was left of his mind. He pulled his fist back, aiming a sloppy, drunken punch at Harrison's face. Harrison didn't even blink. With terrifying speed and precision, he easily deflected Carter's swing, stepping into Carter's space. In one fluid motion, Harrison drove a punishing right hook directly into Carter's jaw. The impact was a sickening crack. Carter's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the polished marble floor like a puppet with its strings cut, landing in an undignified heap. Blood immediately began to pool at the corner of his mouth. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom, followed by a shocked silence. Harrison calmly adjusted his cuffs, not sparing the unconscious man on the floor a second glance. He looked at Ava, his expression instantly softening into a look of quiet concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt your wrist?" Ava looked down at Carter, then back up at Harrison. The contrast was blinding. One man offered her chaos, pain, and demands. The other offered her stability, protection, and respect. "I am perfectly fine," Ava said, her voice steady and clear for the entire room to hear. She didn't look at Carter again. "In fact, I've never been better." She seamlessly looped her arm through Harrison's. "Let's get some fresh air. It suddenly smells like garbage in here." As they turned to walk toward the terrace doors, leaving the hotel security to drag Carter's limp body away, neither of them noticed the figure standing in the shadows near the service elevators. Olivia stood there, wrapped in a cheap trench coat, her face pale and contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She had followed Carter on a budget flight, desperate to beg her way back into his life. But watching him humiliate himself for Ava, watching him get knocked out for a woman who didn't even care, something inside Olivia finally snapped. Her life was ruined. The medical board was investigating her. She was facing prison, and it was all because of the woman in the emerald gown. Olivia's hand slipped into her coat pocket, her fingers closing tightly around a heavy, cold metal lighter. Her eyes fixed on Ava's retreating back, a terrifying, empty smile stretching across her face. If her life was burning down, she was going to make sure Ava burned with it. Please reply with continue. The night air on the hotel terrace was crisp, a sharp contrast to the stifling drama that had just unfolded inside the ballroom. Ava stood by the stone balustrade, taking a slow, deep breath. The adrenaline from Carter's sudden appearance was fading, replaced by a profound, settling exhaustion. "You handled that with remarkable grace," Harrison said, stepping out onto the terrace. He held 2 fresh glasses of water, offering her one. "Though I apologize for the physical altercation, he didn't leave me much choice." Ava took the glass, her fingers brushing his. "You don't need to apologize for protecting me, Harrison. I never thought I'd see him look so utterly broken. It's strange." "Spitty?" Harrison asked softly, his eyes watching her closely. "No," Ava said firmly, looking out over the city lights. Disgust that I wasted a decade trying to build a home with a man who couldn't even build a spine. He doesn't love me, Harrison. He just hates losing." Harrison smiled, a slow, appreciative curve of his lips. "He lost the moment he stopped seeing you. His blindness is my absolute gain." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy and warm. Ava turned to look at him, really look at him. The graying temples, the broad shoulders, the eyes that looked at her not as a possession to be managed, but as a partner to be respected. Before she could form a reply, the shrill, deafening scream of the hotel's fire alarm shattered the quiet of the night. It wasn't a drill. Almost immediately, the smell of acrid, chemical smoke billowed out from the slightly ajar terrace doors. Panic shouts erupted from inside the ballroom. "Fire! The East Wing is on fire!" someone screamed. Harrison's demeanor instantly shifted from relaxed suitor to a man of action. He grabbed Ava's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "We need to move now." They rushed back into the building, fighting against the tide of panicked guests, fleeing toward the main exits. The smoke was already thickening in the corridors, a dark, suffocating fog that stung the eyes and burned the throat. "This way, to the service stairs," Harrison instructed, pulling his suit jacket off and pressing it against Ava's face to filter the smoke. "Keep low." As they navigated the chaotic smoke-filled hallway, a figure suddenly emerged from the stairwell directly in front of them, blocking their path. It was Olivia. Her hair was singed, her face smeared with soot, and her eyes were wide with a manic, terrifying clarity. She was holding a large, heavy fire extinguisher, not to put out the flames, but gripped tightly like a weapon. Behind her, the stairwell was a roaring inferno, the flames licking up the wallpaper. "You took everything from me," Olivia shrieked, her voice barely audible over the roaring fire and blaring alarms. "My career, my life, Carter. You're going to burn Ava." She raised the heavy metal cylinder, lunging forward with shocking speed, aiming directly at Ava's head. Harrison shoved Ava roughly to the side, taking the brunt of Olivia's charge. The heavy extinguisher glanced off his shoulder with a sickening thud, sending him crashing into the wall. He grunted in pain, dropping to one knee. "Harrison!" Ava screamed. Olivia, completely unhinged, raised the extinguisher again, stepping toward Ava. "Die! Just die!" Ava scrambled backward, her high heels slipping on the polished floor. She was cornered between the burning stairwell and a heavy, ornate display table. Just as Olivia swung the weapon down, a figure burst through the smoke from the opposite end of the hallway, moving with reckless, desperate speed. It was Carter. He had regained consciousness outside, and seeing the smoke billowing from the floor where the gala was held, had fought his way back past the fire lines. His face was already bruised and bloody from Harrison's punch, but his eyes were fixed entirely on Ava. "Ava!" Carter roared. He threw his entire body weight forward, tackling Olivia just as the extinguisher was inches from Ava's skull. The impact sent both Carter and Olivia crashing hard to the floor. The heavy metal cylinder clattered away, rolling into the smoke. "Carter!" Olivia shrieked, clawing at his face. "Let me go! Let me kill her!" Carter ignored her, violently shoving her off him and scrambling toward Ava. "Are you okay? Did she hurt you?" he gasped, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her. "I am fine," Ava coughed, waving the smoke away, her eyes darting to Harrison, who was pulling himself up against the wall, favoring his injured shoulder. "We need to get out," Carter yelled over the roar of the fire. He looked up, and his face suddenly went pale with absolute terror. Directly above Ava, the ceiling was giving way. The intense heat had melted the supports of a massive, multi-tiered crystal chandelier. With an ominous groaning crack, the structure detached. Hundreds of pounds of glass and metal plummeted downward. "Ava, move!" Carter screamed. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. It was the purest, most selfless instinct he had displayed in his entire life. Carter lunged forward, violently shoving Ava out of the drop zone and throwing himself into the space she had just occupied. The chandelier slammed into the floor with the force of a bomb. The sound of shattering crystal was deafening. Ava, thrown safely clear, watched in horror as the massive structure collapsed directly onto Carter's lower half. A scream of unimaginable agony ripped from Carter's throat. A sound so raw and guttural, it silenced the crackling fire. He lay pinned beneath the twisted metal and shattered glass, his legs completely crushed. Blood immediately began to pool around him, dark and thick. "Carter!" Olivia screamed from down the hall, scrambling to her feet and running the opposite way, disappearing into the smoke, saving herself. Ava stared at the man trapped beneath the wreckage, her ex-husband, the man who had driven away while she miscarried in the street, the man who had just sacrificed himself to save her. "Ava," Harrison grunted, staggering over to her. He grabbed her arm. "We can't move that. We have to go. The firefighters are coming up." Carter turned his head, his face gray, sweat mixing with the blood and soot. He looked at Ava, his eyes wide, terrified, and filled with a desperate, pleading hope. He reached out a trembling, bloodied hand toward her. "Ava," he rasped, his voice weak. "I saved you. I saved you this time, right?" He was looking at her, waiting for the absolution, waiting for the realization that his ultimate sacrifice had finally balanced the scales, that the debt was paid, that he had earned his way back into her heart. Ava looked down at his outstretched hand. She looked at his crushed legs. She felt the intense heat of the fire pressing in on them. She didn't reach back. She didn't kneel, but she simply looked at him with an expression of profound, chilling emptiness. "You didn't save me, Carter," Ava said, her voice perfectly calm, cutting through the chaos. "You just delayed the inevitable consequences of your own choices. I stopped needing you to save me the day I lay bleeding on the pavement while you drove away." She turned her back on his outstretched hand. She wrapped her arm around Harrison's waist to support his injured shoulder. And together, They walked toward the emergency exit, leaving Carter Vance trapped in the burning ruins, screaming her name until his voice gave out. Please reply with continue. The persistent rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the sterile, overly bright VIP hospital room. It had been 4 weeks since the fire at the London hotel. 4 weeks since Carter Vance's world had been permanently, irreversibly altered. He lay in the hospital bed, his lower body encased in heavy casts and traction pins. The doctors had managed to save his legs, but the nerve damage was catastrophic. The prognosis was brutal. He would never walk unassisted again. The arrogant, fast-paced CEO, who used to command boardrooms while pacing like a caged tiger, was now confined to a wheelchair, a prisoner of his own destroyed body. His mother, a severe woman with perfectly coiffed hair, sat in the corner chair, aggressively tapping at her phone. "The PR team is working overtime, Carter," she said, her tone brisk, devoid of maternal warmth. "We're spinning this as a heroic act, a tragic accident while saving a colleague. The stock dipped, but it's stabilizing. However, we need to address the Olivia situation." Carter stared blankly at the ceiling, his eyes hollow. "Olivia?" "Yes, she was arrested at Heathrow trying to board a flight to Dubai. The hotel security footage clearly caught her carrying the fire extinguisher and initiating the blaze in the service stairwell." His mother sighed, rubbing her temples. "Between the arson, the attempted murder charges here, and the medical fraud investigation you apparently triggered back home, she's looking at 20 to 30 years. The woman is a complete liability. I always told you she was trash." Carter didn't react. The name Olivia felt like a distant, ugly echo. He didn't care about the stock prices. He didn't care about the prison sentence. He only cared about the suffocating, crushing emptiness in his chest. "Has Ava called?" Carter croaked, his voice raw from disuse and despair. "Did she ask about the surgery?" His mother paused, her lips thinning into a tight line. "Carter, you need to let it go. Ava Vance made a public statement praising the London Fire Brigade. She didn't mention you once. She's moved on. She's officially made partner at Harrison's firm. You need to focus on your physical therapy." "I need to see her," Carter whispered, a single tear escaping his eye and rolling down his bruised cheek. "I need her to see what I did for her." It took another 2 weeks of agonizing physical therapy before Carter was cleared to fly back to the States. He returned to a penthouse. The ashes in the fireplace had been cleaned away by the housekeeper, but the chill remained. He hired the best private investigators money could buy, not to harass her, but just to know where she was. He learned she had returned to New York, operating out of Harrison's flagship office downtown. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the skies opened up, unleashing a torrential, freezing downpour over the city. Carter ordered his driver to park across the street from the sleek, glass-fronted building of her new firm. He waited for 3 hours. Finally, the revolving doors opened. Ava stepped out. She looked breathtaking. She wore a tailored camel coat, her hair blown out perfectly, a confident, relaxed smile playing on her lips as she conversed with the man walking beside her. Harrison. He held a large black umbrella over them both, his hand resting casually, protectively, on the small of her back. They looked like equals. They looked happy. Agonizing spike of jealousy and profound loss tore through Carter's chest. He couldn't stand it. He pushed the button to lower the ramp of his specialized van. "Mr. Vance, it is pouring," his driver protested. "You shouldn't." "Help me into the chair," Carter commanded, his voice trembling. The driver relented. Minutes later, Carter was wheeling himself across the rain, slicked pavement, his expensive suit instantly soaked, the cold biting into his aching legs. Ava. He shouted over the roar of the rain and traffic. Ava stopped. Harrison paused, his expression instantly hardening as he recognized the man struggling in the wheelchair. Carter pushed himself closer, looking up at her from the seat. He was drenched, shivering, a pathetic, broken shadow of his former self. "Ava, please," Carter begged, his voice cracking. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care about his pride. He gripped the armrests of his chair, straining his upper body, trying to stand. The agony in his shattered legs was blinding, but he forced himself up. For 2 agonizing seconds, he stood, swaying violently, before his legs gave out entirely. He crashed down onto the wet concrete, directly at her feet. "Carter," Ava said, her voice flat, devoid of panic or sympathy. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, kneeling in the puddles, looking up at her with a face ravaged by grief. "I'm so sorry. Look at me, Ava. I am ruined. I lost my legs to save you. I threw Olivia to the wolves. I've lost everything. Just give me one chance. Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I'll give you everything I own. Just don't look at me like I am nothing." Harrison shifted his weight, preparing to step between them. But Ava placed a gentle, restraining hand on his arm. She stepped forward, looking down at the man who had once been her entire world. "You think this changes anything?" Ava asked, her voice calm and piercingly clear against. "You think destroying yourself somehow repairs what you destroyed in me?" "I saved your life," Carter cried out, clutching at the hem of her coat. "You saved me from a fire your mistress started," Ava corrected coldly, stepping back so his hands fell away. "And even if you hadn't, even if your sacrifice was pure, it doesn't erase the day you left me bleeding in the street. It doesn't erase the cold balcony. You don't get to torture me for years and then buy my forgiveness with one act of desperate guilt." Let's talk about the currency of guilt. Carter took a chandelier to the legs and genuinely believed it was a transaction that would purchase Ava's forgiveness. Historically, women are expected to melt at a man's grand physical sacrifice. If a man is bleeding, we are supposed to nurse him back to health and conveniently forget the decade he spent breaking our spirit. Ava's refusal here is a masterclass in absolute detachment. She looks at his crushed legs and recognizes it for what it is, the consequence of a fire his mistress started. You cannot bankrupt a woman's soul for 5 years and then expect to clear the debt with one dramatic, desperate dive. A woman resting in her own power simply does not accept bleeding knees as an apology. Carter stared at her, the last flicker of hope dying in his chest, as he realized she truly felt nothing for him anymore. No hate, no anger, just a profound, impenetrable indifference. "I loved you, Carter," Ava said, her tone final and absolute. "I loved you so much it almost killed me. But I woke up and I realize now that the man I loved never actually existed. You were just a projection of my own effort." She looked at him one last time, a pathetic man kneeling in the rain, broken by his own arrogance. "You are truly pathetic," she said softly. "Don't ever come near me again." She turned her back on him. Harrison stepped beside her, seamlessly adjusting the umbrella to keep her perfectly dry, his arm wrapping securely around her shoulders. They walked toward a waiting town car, their steps in perfect, effortless synchronization. Carter remained kneeling on the pavement, the icy rain washing over his face, soaking into his bones. He watched the taillights of their car disappear into the gray city traffic. The physical agony in his legs was nothing compared to the absolute, crushing reality of his existence. He was the wealthy, powerful Carter Vance, and he would spend the rest of his life sitting in a chair, entirely alone, haunted by the ghost of a woman he had thrown away. The morning sun spilled across the wide, reclaimed wood floors of the coastal California home, carrying with it the sharp, clean scent of the Pacific Ocean. There were no blaring alarms here, no suffocating corporate schedules dictated by a frantic assistant. There was only the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below and the low, rich aroma of freshly ground espresso. Ava stood on the wraparound deck, wrapping a thick cashmere cardigan tightly around her silk nightgown. She closed her eyes, letting the cool, salt-tinged breeze wash over her face. She was 34, and for the first time in her life, her soul felt completely, unapologetically weightless. "If you stand out there much longer, I'm going to have to file a motion to bring you back to bed." Ava turned, a slow, natural smile breaking across her face. Harrison was leaning against the sliding glass door frame, holding two steaming ceramic mugs. He wore comfortably worn linen pants and a soft Henley, his silver-streaked hair slightly tousled from sleep. He looked less like a cutthroat legal shark and more like a man who had finally found his sanctuary. She walked over, taking the mug from his hand. Their fingers brushed, and even after 2 years together, the simple, steady warmth of his touch sent a quiet thrill straight to her chest. "I was just thinking about the Mercer acquisition," Ava murmured, taking a sip of the perfectly pulled espresso. "Opposing counsel is going to try to leverage the overseas assets to stall. I want to hit them with the regulatory clauses before they even open their binders." Harrison chuckled, his chest rumbling. He didn't tell her to stop thinking about work. He didn't complain that she wasn't paying enough attention to him. Instead, his eyes darkened with a familiar, deep-seated admiration. "You're going to absolutely gut them," Harrison said, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to the curve of her neck. "I'll sit back and take notes. It's my favorite show in town." That was the magic of Harrison. He never once asked her to shrink herself to make room for his ego. When she stepped into her power, he didn't feel threatened. He pulled up a chair and handed her the microphone. 3 hours later, the relaxed woman on the deck had transformed into a lethal weapon, stepping into the glass-walled boardroom of their downtown firm. Ava was a vision of modern armor in a razor-sharp ivory suit. As the lead partner on the firm's biggest merger of the decade, the room fell dead silent the moment she took her seat at the head of the table. The opposing counsel, an older man used to bullying his way through negotiations, immediately tried to talk over her. "Now, little lady, if you just look at the long-term projections," he started, his tone dripping with condescension. Harrison, sitting to Ava's right, didn't intervene to play the white knight. He simply leaned back in his leather chair, took a slow sip of his water, and looked at the older lawyer with an expression of profound, pitying amusement. Ava didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply slid a thick, meticulously tabbed dossier across the polished wood, her eyes locking onto the older man with the chilling precision of a sniper. "With respect, counselor, I am not your little lady. I am the woman who is about to meticulously dismantle your client's entire regulatory defense," Ava stated, her voice as smooth as glass. "Page 42, you failed to disclose the environmental liabilities. Now, we can either negotiate on my terms, or we can go to court, where I will ensure your client pays triple the asking price in fines alone. Your move." The older lawyer's face flushed a deep, mottled purple. He looked toward Harrison, expecting the male partner to step in and soften the blow. Harrison just smiled, gesturing vaguely toward Ava. "Don't look at me, Jim. She is the boss. I am just here to carry her briefcase." By noon, the deal was signed, sealed, and completely dominated on Ava's terms. That evening, The firm threw a private celebration at an exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. The champagne flowed, and the energy was electric. Ava stood near the edge of the terrace, looking out at the glittering lights, feeling a profound sense of ownership over her own life. She had built this. Out of the ashes of a toxic, soul-crushing marriage, she had forged an empire. She had stopped waiting for a man to choose her, and instead had simply chosen herself. She felt the familiar, comforting weight of a heavy coat being draped over her shoulders. Harrison stepped up beside her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his solid chest. "You were absolutely terrifying today," he murmured into her hair. "Did I scare you?" Ava asked, turning her head to catch his eye, a playful, wicked glint in her gaze. "Terrified me," Harrison agreed, his voice dropping an octave, his hands tightening gently on her waist. "I've never been more turned on in my entire life." Ava laughed, the sound bright and clear, completely free of the shadows of her past. She turned in his arms, wrapping her hands around his lapels. She looked into his eyes that held no secrets, no hidden agendas, no leftover ghosts of ex-girlfriends, only a deep, unwavering, and mature devotion. "I love you, Harrison," she said softly, the words feeling entirely different than they used to. They weren't a plea for validation, they were a statement of fact, a gift freely given to a man who actually deserved it. Harrison's expression softened into something incredibly tender. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee in a dramatic, desperate display. He simply opened it, revealing a stunning emerald cut diamond ring that caught the city lights. "I love you, Ava, not because you take care of me and not because you need me," Harrison said, his voice steady and fiercely sincere. "I love you because you are the most brilliant, resilient, and breathtaking woman I have ever known. I don't want to save you. I just want the honor of standing beside you while you conquer the world. Marry me." Ava looked at the ring, then up at the man who had helped her remember how to breathe. There was no hesitation, no ghost of trauma holding her back. The past was dead, but she was spectacularly, radiantly alive. "Yes," she whispered, her smile outshining the diamond. "Yes, partner." Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of champagne and an unbreakable future. Ava closed her eyes, the ocean breeze seemingly carrying away the very last traces of the old Ava, leaving behind a woman who had finally learned that true love didn't ask her to stand in the cold. It built her a castle where she could always see the sun. Let's pour a glass of something uncompromisingly dry and discuss the myth of the rescuer. For years, Ava operated under the crippling delusion that if she just managed the background smoothly enough, if she polished his life perfectly enough, Carter would eventually realize her worth. But men like Carter do not value the foundation. They only admire the fragile, decorative ornaments that constantly require their glue. He needed Olivia's weaponized helplessness because his entire masculine identity rested on being needed. Competence inherently threatened him. Notice the absolute contrast when Ava steps into her own power. She doesn't find a new man to rescue her. Harrison is not a savior. He is an equal. He is an audience member who happily bought a front row ticket to watch her win. When a man is secure in his own skin and his own intellect, he doesn't need to lock you on a freezing balcony to make himself feel tall. He hands you the legal dossier, pulls up a chair, and smiles while you meticulously dismantle the opposition. The most dangerous lie we are sold is that enduring neglect is a badge of feminine honor. We are taught to be the tirelessly supportive actress in our own lives, waiting for the male lead to eventually drop the curtain and hand us a bouquet. Ava's ultimate triumph is that she simply walked off his toxic set and built her own studio. She didn't forgive Carter, not because she was cruel, but because he was finally blissfully irrelevant to her timeline. So here is my question for you tonight. Have you ever frozen on a metaphorical balcony, waiting for a man who entirely forgot he locked the door? And when you finally shattered the glass and walked away, what empire did you build from the ashes? Tell me your exit strategies and your boardroom victories in the comments. I am reading Madam Read Out.